For this video I asked a German combat engineer fighting in Ukraine with the Legion what he thinks about the situation that Russia is getting T-55s out of storage. Of course, there were a lot of reactions on Twitter and elsewhere, yet I wanted to know what an actual soldier fighting in Ukraine has to say about it, since he, unlike most of us, has actually skin in the game. I also asked him about various other assessments. For instance, if he would prefer fighting a T-72 without explosive reactive armor, like a T-72M, versus a T-55 with a lot of explosive reactive armor, like the T-55 AMV. If you want to check out his video, here's the link. It is also linked in the sources. So the first question was, what was your first reaction when you heard the news that the T-54, T-55s were being brought out of storage? He answered, about like this man shrugging emoji. You can see everything from stone old to cutting edge here. There's just not much that surprises you. I've had Maxim's machine guns, for example, but also reconnaissance electronics that are so new I can talk about them. For the uninitiated, the Maxim machine gun was the first fully automatic machine gun in the world. It is in service since 1886. Although a variant that was confirmed for the Ukraine war is the PM M1910, which was introduced in 1910. My second question was, now quite many people are very dismissive about those tanks, yet most of them, like myself, are sitting far away in comfy chairs eating burgers. You, on the other hand, are on the receiving end of those weapons, so what is your take on the T-55s as a weapon that you might face? Basically, I have to say that both sides use and love massively indirect fire. This is partly due to the distances here, but also to the Soviet mentality regarding such weapons. We think too rigidly about the primary role of such systems. But basically every ballistic weapon, and we don't really use laser cannons yet, can be used for indirect fire. Western systems are mostly limited to their role in direct targeting. Some context: in the Soviet Union and also in the Russian Federation, artillery is sometimes considered the god of war. The Russian Day of Missile and Artillery Forces on the 19th November. It goes back to the Second World War, since on this day the Soviet forces started the counterattack at Stalingrad. I'm not sure how many other countries have a day for the artillery arm, but I guess the number outside the former Soviet sphere is rather low. Yet let us continue. He notes that Russian weapon systems are generally better prepared to be used for indirect fire. Good example are grenade machine guns. There were improvised approaches in Afghanistan and Iraq to use the Grau, the German automatic grenade launcher 40mm, or the Mk19, the US automatic grenade launcher 40mm, in indirect fire. The Soviet AGS-17 and 30, which are automatic grenade launchers with 30mm on the other hand, already come with a range table and indirect fire optics on the weapon. Similar can be seen on the SPG-9, a Soviet recoilless gun, and the MT-12, a Soviet 100mm anti-tank gun. Hence he assumes that he won't see a T-55, but that its projectiles likely will land near him. He continues, indirect fire from the other types of tanks is already experienced regularly. And at the latest, from Severodonetsk, which was a battle on May to June 2022, one could see a certain learning curve on the Russian side. From there on, initial mistakes were not repeated and main battle tanks were not sent into towns or similar unfavorable situations, but stay outside, for instance, on the hills in front of towns, and fire at them directly or indirectly. Exceptions confirm the rule. For me, as an end user, it doesn't make a difference whether I get 100mm or 122mm high explosive delivered. This also underlines the point that Shifton and I made in our video about the wrong lessons from the Ukraine war, namely that the Russians are learning despite what often is seen on the TikTok war. This of course does not negate that major errors are still happening. Additionally, it might be that infantry is handled quite differently than tanks. He also added some remarks about the ammo situation for the T-55 and contrasted it with the T-62. First, a bit of context. The T-55 has a 100mm gun, the T-62 150mm, the T-64, T-72, T-80 and T-90 have 125mm. Additionally, the T-55 is the most produced tank in human history. The estimates range from around 95 to 100,000. Anyway, about the ammunition supply, I think the ammo supply is easier than you think at first. The T-55 was the export hit par excellence, and is still in operation in several countries, including some that are still in good relations with Russia. Presumably there's still production for it, and even if not, now an old stock is opened which was little touched. I was more surprised by the T-62. It is an exotic caliber. No one except Russia and North Korea has used it extensively for a long time. Next, there were two hypothetical questions about his threat assessment of different tank types with different equipment. First off, I asked if he considers a T-72 without explosive reactive armor blocks like the East German T-72M, or T-55 with a lot of reactive armor blocks like the T-55 EMB a bigger threat. His answer was as follows. Explosive reactive armor works, several times seen and also already tested. Had the parts once salvaged for ballistic tests from frags. Wanted actually to extract the explosive, but the plates are nevertheless quite hard compressed. And at some point my team was tired of me. Sounds dangerous, but I know what the explosives are and what I can do with them. They are definitely infantry anti-tank weapons that can handle it. We have them too. Theoretically, the equipment would be easier to fight without explosive reactive armor, but the likelihood of main battle tanks getting that close is off the charts. So I don't worry about it. In case you wonder why you can work with various equipment on explosive reactive armor panels, be sure to check out my video on why explosive reactive armor does not explode even if a tank is burning. Since I was not sure from the answer which one of the tanks, the T-72M or the T-55 EMV, he considered a bigger threat, I asked again. He responded, regarding the armor, I do not want to commit myself to 100%. It's just top trumps, a game where you compare values of playing cards of a single aspect. There are just many other aspects that affect the combat value. Basically for us, we would simply choose a different weapon ammunition against main battle tanks with explosive reactive armor. The main change would be simply a few kilos more to carry. But as I said, they rarely get that close. The next question was about facing a T-72M without thermal imaging equipment or a T-55 with thermal imaging equipment. Which one he would consider a greater threat. Impact is more effect here than armor. Both sides have weapons that can overcome armor, even the most modern main battle tanks. Therefore, the weighting goes again more in the direction of mobility and firepower, but also tactics. And who sees further and better than the opponent can also usually act first. Not to mention that half of the day is also surprisingly dark, night and so. Therefore, in my opinion, the advantage clearly lies with the device with better optronics and fire control. After making sure I got the answer correct, he confirmed that he considers a T-55 with thermal imaging a greater threat than a T-72 without thermal. Sometimes people note that weapon X is obsolete or ineffective, yet this opinion is clearly not shared by Butya. In my opinion, there are no obsolete weapons as long as you manage to integrate them tactically. A T-55 can't crack a Leo 2? So what? Use it where there are no Leopard 2s, metaphorically speaking. And you can also mix old weapons with new ones, example mortar. The mortar from the 50s we have not used merely to scatter, but for hitting a point target. In some cases we had, after 2 to 3 shots, direct hits. And as infantry I still use the RPG-7 from the 60s, thanks to the wide range of ammunition against everything possible. But often it is on both sides. Rather use what you have and make ahead how to use it best. This reminds me about my PAX-36 video, a German anti-tank gun from the Second World War. In experience reports from 1940 during the campaign in France, the weapon got some very bad reviews for dealing with tanks, but for anti-infantry it got very positive reviews. Now, my final question was as follows. Now for us in comfy chairs we talk a lot about tanks, but for you as a combat engineer on the front line, what enemy weapon systems are the most threatening currently? The first place did not really surprise me, but the second one did. The strongest effectors are on both sides, first place artillery and second place mines. Everything else are basically leftovers. In artillery you see everything, even more than you expect, from old to new, from precise to just scattered. The most bizarre thing I have seen so far was a platoon of 4 52K 85mm anti-aircraft guns captured by the neighboring unit during the Kharkiv offensive at Izium. They were used as artillery by Rosgadia, the internal military force of Russia. Note that the 85mm anti-aircraft gun is a weapon that the Soviets used in the Second World War. This and his previous statements about the Maxim and other weapons suggest that there is some World War II equipment still in use, although in overall the number likely is limited. Yet since these relicts are rare and more rememberable than Cold War weaponry, hence they get far more attention. Anyway, let's continue with mines. But everything is seen as being used for indirect fire. Lately I see a lot of cluster ammunition fired from Uragan or Smerch multiple rocket launchers. And in the same way, scatterable mines are often fired by Russians on potential positions, approach routes, or main supply routes. The classical mines are more and more manipulated by the Russians, which makes the clearance more difficult. And slowly one sees more and more modern things in mines, which were apparently still unknown. Probably because the Soviet stocks have certain gaps. For instance, replica models of the MON-50 are a directional anti-personnel mine very similar to the US Claymore, or the POM-2M, a Soviet scattable self-liquidating fragmentation anti-personnel mine, are becoming more common. Airstrikes were rare and I hope it stays that way, but I have the impression that the Russian Air Force is under pressure to perform and is currently daring to do more. Note that mines like the POM-2 can be deployed in numerous ways with multiple rocket launchers, helicopter-mounted mine-laying systems, remote mining machines, and portable mining kits. Some final remarks, as always, keep the following points in mind. First, this is the impression of a single soldier and his experiences. He serves as a combat engineer, so the experiences of tank crew members, artillerymen and others might be quite different. Additionally, at other parts of the front line, the situation might be quite different. Second, some information might be influenced due to operational security, intentionally or unintentionally. Third, as noted, the Russians changed their approach on how to use tanks, so the information might not be correct in a few months anymore. And various other points like memory errors, etc. Thank you to Patriot for answering the questions, thank you for watching, and see you next time.